Hello, and welcome to this economics content training video produced by the Georgia Department of Education. In this episode, we will take a deeper look at Standard SSEPF1, Element A, that is about the rational decision-making model and post-high school choices for students. At first glance, this standard appears very simplistic and straightforward. Often, however, teachers fail to apply the rational decision-making process thoroughly. In an oversimplified view, rational decision-making is essentially cost-benefit analysis. However, what needs to be considered in a cost-benefit analysis is where things can get a little bit tricky and where people often don't do this justice. The basic components of the rational decision-making process are simple. You will need alternatives, criteria, a rating scale, and sometimes a tiebreaker or a way to weight your criteria. There are multiple acronyms out there that various groups promote as simple ways to remember the rational decision-making process, and one is not necessarily better than the other. For the most part, they all involve these key aspects of the process. Let's take a look at each part in a little more detail. The alternatives are just the choices between what you are deciding. It's very important that your alternatives be realistic and achievable. For example, in the standard, students are supposed to consider post-high school life. This may mean deciding between going to the military or college, or it could mean they've already decided to go to college and they are now trying to decide which college to pick. It could also be that they have already decided which college to pick and are now trying to decide how to pay for it. It doesn't necessarily matter what the alternatives are or how many there are. Although 2 or 3 seems to be pretty reasonable. Some students, however, do have 5 or 6 options facing them their senior year. What matters, however, is that the students don't create a false alternative like, I'm going to go live on the moon, or an alternative that is highly unlikely to happen. Oh, well, I just plan to win the lottery. Not only are these choices seemingly silly, in rating them or ranking them, as we will do in a few minutes, they may unfairly influence the other alternatives and not actually help you make a very rational choice. Next is choosing the criteria. This is usually the most difficult part of the process. What matters is what you're trying to answer here, and it's what matters to you. This is a highly individualized component of the process, and it's rare that 2 people would value all the same things, even if the decision is essentially the same. People have to be very honest with themselves when establishing criteria, and it is important to narrow down the criteria to a few of the most important things. Remember, every choice will have a cost, and it's unlikely that your final selection will be able to give you everything that you want. This is a really important point to stress with students. Sometimes students want to add 12 criteria because they really can't decide what's important. The rational decision-making process is all about narrowing down what is important to try to apply that to your alternatives. Once you have your alternatives and your criteria, you need to discuss with students how to evaluate that criteria. Sometimes a yes, no, maybe approach is appropriate and is useful. It's particularly useful if all of the criteria can be answered with a yes, no, or maybe. I'll show you an example of that in just a moment. Another way to do this is to rank the alternatives according to the criteria. This might be helpful if the criteria involves numbers, like total cost or distance to home or something like that. So in a ranking system, essentially one alternative would be the best, and then second best, and third best, so on and so forth. A final option is to rate the alternatives on some kind of scale. Each alternative could be rated on a 0 to 10 or a 1 to 5 or 1 to 3 or something like that. Doing this, however, runs the risk of being a little more subjective than the others and can vary kind of depending on your mood and peer pressure and anything else that's going on in your life at the time. And in some cases, this can actually make the decision-making process harder. I try to encourage students to stick with the yes, no, maybe option. So that's the example we'll be doing here. When teaching this concept to students, start with something simple. Ease them into the process. We do this a lot in economics, but with this particular skill, and it is a skill, we definitely don't want to just throw them right in. So we're going to do an example right now using a very basic decision. What to have for breakfast. So let's say that I have already narrowed down my options or my alternatives to just a few. Because obviously for breakfast, I could have a whole host of things depending on what's in the refrigerator. These alternatives might change from day to day. But in this particular case, I've already narrowed it down to 4 alternatives. I have some cereal and milk, some fresh fruit. I could go down the road to a fast food place and get a biscuit, or I could just not eat anything. These are my 4 alternatives in this particular situation. Could there be more alternatives? Of course. But for this moment in time, these are the things I am considering. This is important to stress with the students as well. The standard gives them an entire list of things that they might consider after high school, but the reality is they are not going to consider all of those things. At least most students won't be considering all of the things in the standard. So it's important that they narrow down their alternatives to very realistic choices. Now, the next thing I've got to do is set up my criteria. And for the students, this is going to be difficult. For example, if they are trying to decide between getting a job or going to college, they have to consider costs like their salary they'll be giving up if they go to college, or the education they'll be getting if they get a job, those kind of things. So what's important? Is making money important? Is pleasing your parents important? Is staying close to home, seeing the world, taking advantage of an opportunity? They really need to narrow down what things are important. For me, and this is not a hugely important decision here in terms of what I'm going to eat for breakfast, but there are some things I would consider. So my criteria are going to be, is it healthy? Can I get it quickly? And will it fill me up? And since all my questions can be answered with yes, no, or maybe, I'm going to use that scale. All right, so once this is set up, the next stage simply requires an honest answer to each question. An honest answer to each question. This is where students will sometimes try to outwit themselves, or will try to put in answers that maybe aren't so honest because they're torn between what they know their rational side of their brain is telling them they should do after high school and what they, quote, want to do. All right, so here we go. Let's start with cereal and milk. So I'm going to go with each alternative and apply each criteria to that alternative. Is it healthy? Well, it depends on the cereal, and in real life, we'd be able to look at the nutritional information and decide. But for now, we'll put maybe, because it depends on how much and the cereal and that kind of thing. Can I get it quickly? Yes. Will it fill me up? I'll say yes, because I have enough that I could have seconds if I wanted. And some cereals can be kind of heavy, and so I'll say yes. Now, to the fruit. Is it healthy? Yes. Quickly? You bet. Will it fill me up? I'm going to put maybe here. Fruit is not as substantial to me, and if I'm only having fruit for breakfast, I'm not sure that's going to hold me over till lunch. What about the fast food biscuit? Healthy? No. Can I get it quickly? Not compared to the other options, and I have no idea what the line will be like when I get there, and even to get there, I have to drive down the road and get dressed, so no, that's a little more of a time commitment. Will it fill me up? Yes. And finally, I have the alternative, of eating nothing. Is that healthy? No. Remember, breakfast, most important meal of the day, right? Can I do this quickly? Of course. And will it fill me up? No. So, what have I learned? Well, if I am acting rationally, and that's very important, if I am acting rationally, I shouldn't skip breakfast. It gives me 2 no's, and there are other options that have better choices. I can also forget about the fast food biscuit. So the model has already helped me. It's taken my 4 options and narrowed it down to 2. But now I'm torn between cereal and fruit. Both have 2 yeses and a maybe. So what do I do? Well, there are 2 ways to solve this dilemma. 1, decide which criteria is more important than the others by assigning them weights. For example, if health is my main concern, I should eat the fruit. On the other hand, if I am more concerned about not being hungry again for a while, I should go with the cereal. Another way to do this is to add a fourth criteria. I'll add, is it cheap? A single bowl of cereal and a cup of milk is pretty cheap, so I'll put yes. Fruit, on the other hand, at least where I shop, is not, so I go with the cereal. Your students should be able to apply this exact same process to their post-high school choice. Remember, each student will be different and have their own set of criteria, alternatives, ratings, and weight. The process is what is important, not the end result. If students take this seriously and really buy into the process, they will learn a skill that can help them make positive decisions for the rest of their lives.